So again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon with this webinar, Living with Emotional Intelligence. So for this 1 hour webinar today, we will be able to get a glimpse and experience what the full course of the same title will be like. So there will be discussions and interactions between our facilitator and also us participants here. So no worries if you're the shy type of person and wouldn't want to turn on your cameras or your mics. That's okay. We have a chat box here where you can communicate still with your fellow participants and our facilitator. So we hope this webinar will serve as a good introduction for everyone about emotional intelligence and spark interest for everyone to discover and learn more about this topic, especially that this has grown to become a more essential skills now in the workforce. So without further ado, I will be passing the floor now to our speaker or facilitator, Mr. Lito Cornejo. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon. Super excited here to be in this webinar presenting to you leading with emotional intelligence. Just a quick disclaimer here. I might use EI sometimes for emotional intelligence. Sometimes you can also use EQ, EI. They have some variation in terms of their definition, but for our purpose, I might use them interchangeably. So let me just allow me to share my screen. Ali, that's a thumbs up, right? We're good with my slide. Okay. All right, we will start. And the title of our webinar today is Leading with Emotional Intelligence. Just a quick sort of an introduction. I'm still working. I'm still a business professional. But at the same time, if you're going to look at the lower portion of my profile, I'm a certified emotional intelligence practitioner, coach, trainer under two basic frameworks on emotional intelligence. Basically, that's Genos International from Australia and EQI 2.0 from Canada. So I'm very much into utilizing whatever training or concepts or frames that I have learned from my certification, and I have applied this numerous times and opportunities with the way I would conduct myself, how I would manage and lead my team. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we can use experience, we can use the academe, we can use our certifications, and what's important is to have a balance of both. Moving forward, just some ground rules here. We would like you to not be disturbed by during the webinar, so we would appreciate if you can just silence your phone. And then if you need to take a call or your boss is calling you, might be in the office, you can of course just excuse yourself. Anyway, you make sure that you have muted your sounds. And then every time we have a sharing, try to be more respectful. And then, of course, there will be some interactions like Ali has mentioned. I would really appreciate it if you can just participate, even via chat, or if you want to turn off your sounds, you want to speak up, that would be good. Great. That would be, and then you need to be very transparent as well and enjoy this very moment because it's just going to last for about 60 minutes or so. So we'll take advantage of every opportune moment. Okay. Now, I'd like to just give you an overview of the learning objectives of what we will have in July 25. This is not meant for this course, but you will have a foretaste of what's coming up on July. So let me just carefully jump into this and explain it to you and expand it a little bit further. When we say recognize and consciously use emotional data, what we're referring to actually is the use of emotional cues and information. You know that emotions are data. We don't normally treat emotions as an information or a data, but actually, just like when we read, say, financial or balance sheets maybe, or records or when you do surveys or research, these are data, these are variables, and they're very important, but normally we don't take emotions as information or data. And that's part of the training we will be having in July. That means really recognizing this and acknowledging it and taking it into consideration. The other one is to manage and adapt emotional behaviors. That means adjusting your emotional responses. The question is always, sure, I need to adjust, but the question is really the how, because we are faced with different scenarios. You, being leaders, need to understand what's an appropriate behavior, or how do I manage my own emotional responses. And then the third one would be to integrate empathy to promote strong relationships. It simply is incorporating empathy to foster strong relationships, and being able to put ourselves in someone else's shoe and being able to connect with their emotions is a very important characteristic of an effective leader. The fourth one is apply collaborative, inclusive, and creative communication process. Of course, this one refers to collaborative communications. Without communication, it's really very difficult to collaborate, and that requires you, how do you solve teams, how do you solve team problems and engage team members. And then we have gain emotional insights to understand and implement change. That simply is acquiring emotional understanding. Now that you're able to develop empathy or being able to read cues, emotional cues from your teammates, you'd be able to more effectively facilitate and execute change. Then the last one is to implement emotionally or EI motivational skills. What it means is being able to cultivate understanding of the emotional needs of your teammates, especially behaviors. And an effective leader should be able to build stronger relationships and foster a more positive and productive work environment if you're able to connect on not only on the cognitive level, but also on the emotional level. So there's plenty of stuff or materials that are stored in our upcoming training, and I hope that you'll be able to have a glimpse of how these can be very helpful to you as a leader. Now, to be more specific, let's dive into the modules. We have a total of 8 modules. No, that's going to cover for 2 days, I believe. And module 1, integrating emotional intelligence. What does that mean? I just would like to expound on this a little bit further. EI involves ability to understand and manage one's own emotions. That is already a component of EI. In any definition that you're going to find in Google or in the dictionary, you will always find that EI involves the ability to understand and manage one's own emotions. And therefore, in that module 1, we will cover EI communication and its impact, because we do have an impact. Whether you like it or not, emotions are very contagious. So we need to understand, how does my speaking, how does my movement, how does a leader effectively influence others? No? And that's in the module 1, integrating EI with your leadership competencies. In module 2, achieving emotional intelligent personal influence is being able to essentially use effective communications in leadership. So we will be covering authentic leadership. When I say authentic leadership, it means being consistent with whatever you say with how you behave. I think being able to be consistent means you become authentic, and then you'd be able to have a good and effective influence with those people around you. Module 3 is creating emotionally intelligent inspiration. Creating emotionally intelligent inspiration through storytelling, sharing experiences is more important. Of course, they're very important in how you're connecting with those people around you. Storytelling is a key tool, And sharing your experience is also a key factor to be able to influence and connect with your audience. It does not only connect with your audience, it inspires action. It also encourages growth. So overall, it's really a very important component with regards to inspiring others. Number four would be encouraging emotionally intelligent collaboration practices. And this means prioritizing certain practices, EI collaborative practices. What are those collaborative practices? Which is more like being able to manage your own stress, being able to manage conflict, being able to have motivation and accountability, and prioritizing these practice in teams can work together more effectively and achieve the goals of the team more efficiently. So here, basically, we will identify types of leader inquiry that strengthens relationship and creativity. Module 5 is managing change. Managing change with emotional intelligence. As we know, all organization, even people, go through change. They said it's a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? So EI is a very important comment in how we adapt. How flexible are we, and how adaptable are we? And not only that, we will also be covering how do we understand and address resistance to change? How do we build trust and rapport, adapting to changing circumstances? And at the same time, how do you maintain morale and motivation? So in short, EI is essential for managing change successfully. And we will also be covering that aspect. And then you have module 6, which is attaining healthy conflict with EI. And we will be covering the role of interpersonal skills in achieving healthy conflict. Not only interpersonal skills, but how do you maintain interpersonal skills, and how do you leverage that to be able to have a healthy conflict using EI. And then module 7 is on leading emotionally intelligent teams. Finally, summing it all up, that means we will analyze your team's EI and apply EI mindfulness practices. When we have, I think, all sorts of mindfulness, self-awareness, development techniques and strategies that you can actually incorporate. And that's very important for a leader, and to be able to share that to your team who also undergo through some kind of stress. And how do you manage stress? How do you help your team manage stress? And that will be covered in module 7. And finally, module 8 will just bring it all together, and hopefully we can arrive a plan, so to speak, on how we can develop further our emotional intelligence. Okay, should you have any questions, just feel free to just put it on the chat, and I'll try to answer them all later. Our next, okay, just a way of introduction to our leadership framework. We will be using the American Management Association leadership framework for EI, and that will be following next to this question. So just a way of introduction, let me ask you this. It's a poll, so I think Ali will be assisting me on this one. Which competency or competencies is your most persistent challenge area? Which competency is your most, sorry for the typo, which competency is your most persistent challenge area? Let me, okay, you're already ambilis, so for super fast, but let me just expound on it. I think you can change. When you say personal influence, are you able to connect with others to build your personal credibility? When we say inspiration, are you aware of your own strengths and liabilities? When we say collaboration, are you adept at identifying other strengths and liabilities? And then when we say change or managing change, are you able to grasp and describe how your own and other people's emotions impact our own attitude and the attitude of others? When we say healthy conflict, do you understand how emotions are factored into the development of strong working relationships? And then when we say team leadership, of course, are you sensitive to the impact of emotions to your teammates? So from that definition, a quick definition of all those concepts, you may answer now. Some of you have answered already. Very good. Let's give it a few more, a minute and a half more, just in case you have, you wanna change your answers or still answer to the question that we have. Okay, seems like we have a lot of people leading towards team leadership, which is, I totally agree. It's never an easy thing, team leadership, because especially when you have a team and as you grow in your career, your organization gets bigger. Those people around you that you're responsible with goes bigger, and they have their own personalities, they have their own problems, they have their challenges. And how do you lead? That's the question. How do you lead effectively in spite of, right? I can relate to that team leadership. And then we have personal influence. That's the basic entry point to team leadership. It's being able to have an influence. How do you connect with others to build your personal credibility or your authenticity? And how do you gain trust, secure buy-in every time you speak, right? How do you secure those things? Right. Okay. I think somebody else is still answering. Okay. I think we get a picture, but thank you for participating in that quick poll or survey. And at least we have an idea that these things, these personal influence, inspiration, collaboration, managing change, healthy conflict, team leadership is really key factors to be able to have an effective leadership. All of us need them. And maybe some of us have just, challenges in one particular area. We're very good in some of the areas where we need to have an improvement on some of the areas, which is a normal thing. And therefore, I'd like to introduce to you the emotionally intelligent approach to leadership that we will be tackling more deeper in in our seminar. But to give you an overview, you will see this is a graphic representation of our emotionally intelligent approach for leaders. Let me just give some time to explain this. It expresses the relationship of the inner circle, which is the red, the one with the red line there, to the blue outer circle. You will notice that the things I asked earlier, personal influence, inspiration, collaboration, change, healthy conflict, team leadership, these EI competencies, now I use EI competencies, they're the ones who are really driving the results. They're the ones that have an immediate contact with those people around you. You can immediately be aware of them. Personal influence, inspiration, collaboration, change, healthy conflict, team leadership. Now, the thing on the center, the aware, connect, manage, and achieve, these are, in my own terminologies, these are composites or cornerstones of EI. And you will find aware, connect, manage, and achieve similar concepts with other emotional intelligence frameworks. They may change a name or two, but it's the same. They have the same meaning. So when you say composites, usually when you have a composite, for example, aware composite would mean you'll have maybe 2 or 3 EI competencies that kind of contributes to being aware. or even with Connect, you can have 2 or 3. It has to be 2 or 3. That's why we call it composites. In the same way, they are cornerstones. They're the ones that kind of the building blocks for all these other EI competencies, the blue ones, the 6 competencies that we will be tackling as the very foundation of EI. So note that we will be studying and practicing each area and competency through the program in July. So you don't want to miss it. You don't want to you'll be learning a lot by just building these emotionally intelligent competencies, and it's a quite a huge framework. That's why emotionally intelligence are subdivided into composites and competency skills. It's not a one competency thing, like you learn awareness and then all of a sudden you have a very high EI. There are still some other areas that we need to cover. So that's our emotionally intelligent approach for leaders. All right. And I think if you, like I said, if you have any questions, just let me know and we will try to answer that. Now, explain this one. We will be explaining this further in the upcoming seminar, but this is a goal tracker and action planner. And what it does is it provides you guidance and set your goals in staying organized and motivated while you are developing your EI, leadership EI. So very important tool. You will be provided with with this one, and as we develop your the EI competencies, it calls the goal tracker and action planner booklet, a very important tool. So there will be writing, of course, there will be some reflection. So you can have, you already have an idea that these things has to be driven by your own insight and by your own discovery. So we keep talking about emotional intelligence. We talk about EI. I keep on mentioning emotional intelligence, but what is EI? What is emotional intelligence, therefore? So we'd like to give to you our operational definition of emotional intelligence. It says there, the ability to perceive emotions, to assess and generate emotions, to assist thought, to understand emotions and emotional knowledge, and to reflectively regulate emotions to promote emotional and intellectual growth. Quite a mouthful, so let's break it down so that you at least by the end of this webinar, you already have a good grasp of what EI is. And it starts off with the ability to perceive emotions, a very important aspect of EI. You will find that perception or perception of emotions is a major component. Rolled into that component is self-awareness, self-management, and so on and so forth. Then you have the generating of emotion, being able to evaluate, assess, or generate emotions. All of us generate emotion, but not many would be able to assess and evaluate where these emotions are, how important these emotions are, being able to identify these emotions. There you go. That's part of emotional intelligence. And then you have to understand emotions and emotional knowledge. So we're treating emotions as data. And what is this data telling me? And how is it influencing my decision making? And then finally, reflectively regulate emotions, which is referring to self-management, being able to manage my own emotions as a leader. Because as a leader, if you cannot manage your own emotions, how do we expect you to manage others? And remember, you're very contagious as a leader. And therefore, it's very important that we need to manage our own emotions, especially in decision making. And we don't want our emotions driving our decisions. You want to be a crisscross of your prefrontal cortex and, of course, your own emotions, right? And we will deal with the technical terms later, but for now, you now have a very, very succinct definition of EI by Peter Salovey, one of the well-known practitioners of emotional intelligence. They have their own frameworks. And then, so But you might be asking, so where does aware, connect, manage, achieve? In fact, though you're aware, connect, manage, and achieve comes from the very definition of Peter Salovey. We will expound on those ones. We will establish the connections when you enroll in the upcoming seminar in July. Okay, so we know for a fact that emotions play a vital role. We know for a fact that emotions are not coming from my heart, it's coming from my head, because emotions are generated by your brain. But how is it generated by your brain, and why is it important for me to understand how these emotions are being generated? Well, let me tell you first how it's generated. So here, I'll try to be as simple as possible and not be technical because I'm not a doctor, right? So they said the cortex, you find the cortex here. So your brain is, the front of your brain is in the prefrontal cortex, okay? That's the front of your brain. That's in your forehead. Now, the cortex, which is towards the back portion of your brain, is the one that received the signal. Then the thalamus kind of is your relay station. It's kind of sorts things out. They sort things out further. And they're the ones kind of that translates how these images are being received. And then it goes to your normal path. It goes to your prefrontal cortex, manage your actions in accordance with your goal or your behavior or your perceptions. And then finally, the amygdala is a different part of the brain. It's your fight and flight kind of section of your brain. There are times that signals are being thrown by the thalamus, not directly to the prefrontal cortex, but there are moments wherein if they see a threat, remember, thalamus kind of sorts things out. If they see a threat, there's a danger, and they can bypass the prefrontal cortex and then sends the signal directly to your amygdala, which is, your flight and fight section of the brain. So what is emotional intelligence? Well, the challenge is there are times that your brain gets hijacked. Your brain tells you that, hey, there's a fire, when in fact there's no fire. Like, for example, let me illustrate. Somebody gave this illustration to me. Imagine you're in a house and then you heard your smoke alarm sound off, and you heard the alarm of your smoke alarm. And so what do? Usually, the signal coming from your smoke alarm can be just, smoke. A simple, maybe the one you're frying an egg and then it's getting burned, and therefore it triggered the smoke alarm. But the brain doesn't read it that way. Sometimes they see it, the brain reads it like the house is burning, rather than just checking it out. What's happening here? Oh, my sausages are burning, or my eggs are burning. Instead of that, we react to things. And sometimes it's so true, it's so real in our brain, because the signal is being sent directly to our amygdala. And that happens simply because of our experience. It happens with our behavior. It happens with how we're being trained and how we were growing up. Many things. That's why it's very important that EI gets to investigate these things. The emotional intelligence is really a cross between your prefrontal cortex and your emotional part of the brain, which is the amygdala portion. And you will understand all these things because how do you avoid getting hijacked? How do you avoid becoming emotional? When there's overwhelming emotions and you're dictated by how these emotions are welling up inside of you. We will deal with that. And that's why it's so important for you to understand how these connectivity with our brain and with our behavior are manifested. So when there is a behavior, you want to change your behavior, you need to change the way you think. You need to change the way you process emotions. And that's how it basically works. And it begins with, which I've already mentioned to you earlier, with emotional information. Have you, when you're thinking, you don't normally write down your thoughts because there's traveling quite fast. I think that the thought process travels around 2 milliseconds. That's how fast it is. And when we think, we don't normally feel it, but we feel emotions. And usually, the emotions are a manifestation of what's happening in your head. And that's why we need to pick this up, the emotional data. And we need to learn how to understand emotional information and need to treat them as data. We with By trying to investigate, by probing, by asking, by learning. But sometimes the challenge is, but how do I observe emotional information? Well, let's start with identifying what emotions you are feeling, and we will get into that. But for now, I want you to understand that your emotions is data. They are information, just like anything else that we receive. And ignoring them would be very dangerous as a leader. Let me cite you an example. I have leaders in my own team, and being leaders, directors, they sometimes get reassigned to different posts in the Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. And sometimes being promoted to a position and then reassigned would be a good opportunity. But I always remind them that, okay, don't look at it only on the promotion side. Don't look at it only on the financial side. These are facts. And then being able to establish a new house in, for example, in a nice place, or in Calibo, or maybe in the Visayas, would be great. But have you considered the emotional information that you might be generating or causing as you transfer to that place? Your family will be here in Mindanao, you're transferring to the Visayas. And unless you consider that, you're going to have a hard time adjusting or being adaptive, flexible in your new assignment. And I always drive that to my directors and managers to make sure that they understand the emotional impact, because that's the critical thing every time leaders perform. Usually it's the emotional side that kind of causes them to not optimize their performance. That is emotional information is data. So we will learn more about that in July. But I mentioned about being able to identify emotions. That's why we're shifting to some parts of module 1, which is integrating emotional intelligence and leadership. Let me just check my timer. So, okay, integrating emotional intelligence and leadership competencies. So let me just ask you this question. When I consider my ability to identify emotions, I would place my present development as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 being the highest. Now, when I say being able to identify my emotions, you're very specific in observing your emotions. You're very specific in labeling your emotions, and you're able to pinpoint exactly your layer of intensity when it comes to emotion. For example, anger. Are you irate? Are you fuming mad? Are you just irritated? You're very specific in those words. So where are you at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think Ali's also gonna help me with the poll that we're going to have. Yeah, that's the question. Ali, we're gonna flash the are they just going to, they're gonna rate themselves, right? 1 to 5. Ali?
Yes. For this one, we don't have a ready poll, but we can just type in on the chat.
Oh, okay, just let's do the chat then. Okay, we'll have a chat. Yeah, you can chat just the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Average, good. Average, average, average. We have, okay. That's a safe place to be. Number three. Yeah, average. I mean, you're not so bad, you're not so good either. So there's a room for improvement to identify your emotions. All right. All of them, all three, huh? Wow. Very good. Very good. So there's 2.99. Round it off, it's already a three. Good one, Melvin. Okay, all three. I guess we have a two. Very good, Remilito. That's not so bad at all. We have to be more. You have to be more. Do we have majority of our audience are Filipinos, right? Ali, no,
Yes,
majority.
majority. But we
Yeah.
also have participants from other countries.
We also have participants with other countries for the benefit of our of those who are not Filipinos. The Filipino language is quite limited when it comes to vocabulary in terms of emotions. We express ourselves by repeating the same word. Like when we are angry, we use the term galit. That's galit when it comes to, that's a Tagalog term for angry. So when we are really, really angry or irate or fuming mad, we just double the same word. We call it galit na galit. It's how we express our the intensity of our emotions. And that has always been a challenge for me. Where every time I'm being asked to teach in Tagalog, I said, oh no, I'm gonna have a hard time articulating emotions because we have a very limited vocabulary. Anyway, that's just a side note, but thank you for sharing. I guess we have an average of 3.999. 3.999. But yes, that's the average. And you know, there is a study, just on a side note, there was a study wherein they did a 500,000, I think that's the sample size, 500,000. And what they did was to rate their emotional awareness, being able to identify emotions and specifically, and based on their research, 70% of their sample size have below average self-awareness. That means not being able to identify emotions. That means only 30% are really, above average when it comes to specifying the kind of emotions that they have. And I'd like to share with you why do you think it's important for us to identify emotions? Well, for one, there seems to be, when we identify emotions, it seems to be linked to connecting what's in our brain. Say the brain I explained to you earlier. It would be easier if you just think of it like this is the the thinking brain and this is the emotional brain. So let's forget about some of the terms for the meantime. So you got a thinking brain and you got emotional brain. And by identifying those emotions, it kind of connects. It just makes a connection so quickly when we specifically say, I fear snakes, something like that. Or I would acknowledge it. So the brain reads it somehow. And all of a sudden, there's a immediate connection between your thinking brain and your emotional brain. So how do we now develop vocabularies in identifying emotions, right? And that's always been the question. And I'd like to share with you Plutchik's emotion circumflex. There you go. Plutchik's emotion circumflex. It's because emotions can be confusing, correct? I mean, in all honesty. But what if you could explore them in a way that would use a graphic like Plutchik's circumflex, and you'd be able to dig deeper with a very simple, very powerful emotions list. The Plutchik model of emotions really provides us a logical way to make sense of our feelings. And you can see the different colors. I call them leaf. One leaf, you'll find several layers of emotions, and each layer would have their own intensity. And we will be covering Plutchik's emotion circumflex and how we could actually use it. But for now, it's enough for us to understand that there are 8 sectors in terms of your 8 primary emotion dimensions. No, there are 8. You will find. I don't know whether you see my my mouse here, it says their joy, and then trust, fear, surprise, and so on and so forth. So they are, let me just try to read it. They are joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, anticipation, anger, and disgust. Okay. So now, according to Plutchik, these are your 8 major emotions, but they have variations. But how do you utilize the variations? And Plutchik presents this framework wherein many people can utilize his framework in identifying specific emotions they are feeling. And that helps them gain better understanding of their own emotional states. And writers, they utilize similar to Plutchik's emotion circumflex in writing novels, in writing stories, because as human being, we are an emotional being. We are filled with emotions. And since we are filled with emotions, don't you think it's very important that these emotions that drives my behavior, these emotions that kind of is affected easily by situations and different forms of stimuli, needs to be understood by me trying to learn how to be able to understand, identify my own emotions. And we're going to be doing that. We're going to be exploring that when we go to attend the seminar in July. Now, on the other hand, as leaders, you cannot just, they said, data doesn't change minds. You won't be able to persuade people by just merely using data. You need to be able to connect emotionally. There should be some kind of an emotional connection, they say. And then, best way to relay that is through stories and so on and so forth. And some of the leaders, the well-known speakers, utilizes emotional vocabulary or emotive vocabulary when connecting with their audience. Be it an announcement, be it just a simple conversation, be it a formal presentation, they would utilize emotive vocabularies. And let me just, just a short segue to emotional awareness. There's a question here. What is one leadership opportunity? So you think of a leadership situation, a situation wherein your leadership needs to be delivering a message that captures emotive vocabulary. In what situations are those? What situations are those wherein your ability to communicate utilizing emotive vocabulary would be an asset to you? I can name one: performance evaluation. Oh, that's very critical, diba? When you're doing a performance evaluations to your colleagues or to your staff, it's very important that you're able to utilize emotive vocabulary like "I understand," or that is very encouraging. That is very comforting. These are the kind of emotive language that we can use. The other side, you can be very negative also, like very appalling, very tragic, you feel betrayed, you feel vindicated, or you feel angry or proud or beautiful. These are some of the emotive languages that you can use. So going back to my question, what is one leadership opportunity where a clear and complete message that captures emotive vocabulary would be an asset? So, Ali, this will be also using a chat, no?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, okay. So let me hear from you some opportunities or moments in your leadership wherein you can actually have a good utilization of emotive vocabulary and has become an asset. I've already given an example, which is performance evaluation. Anything else that you can think of? Anyone? You can type in your answers. Coaching and absolutely. Every time we're doing coaching and mentoring, Sometimes we mix the two, coaching and mentoring. But say, for example, just lifting up the coaching when you ask questions. So, and then recognize their specific emotions that you pick up from them. You seem to be disturbed, or you seem to be bothered by what happened earlier. Those are emotive questions. When you're mentoring, when you're teaching somebody, say, for example, how to handle a machine, or how to manage a a sales call, uh, being able to motivate them, being able to encourage them using emotive language is very, very important. Anyone else other than coaching and mentoring, other than performance evaluation, who can give us maybe two or three more? Anyone? Coaching and mentoring? Anyone else who can give? Kahit di kayo sure, just you can just type it in. We will know nonetheless. No one? Staff meeting. Okay, that is also very true. Especially, during staff meetings, we would, especially in my line of work, we would look at charts, we would look at graphs, we would look at statistical deviations and what have you. And these are all important, I must admit. But then again, when a person is when a person, for example, is generating these charts and emotion and charts and data, you want to look at it. How do they feel about it, especially when they're generating such poor or dismal performance? You want to be able to connect using emotive questions. Oh, one more. I think we got a few more minutes. A new project responsibility, especially about when you're sharing someone a new project, you'd like to ask questions like, so how do you feel about leading this project? How do you feel being the project lead? How do you feel if we go this way in your project? And these are all emotions that you would like to solicit. These, you can also use emotive language to be able to connect with that person. When that person receives it, that emotion, and it jives, just like handling of different behavior of team member, when you have to you can do it in both. When you're encouraging one to continue, say, influencing maybe that person is a good influence, sure, by all means you can use emotive language. I find you a very strong leader. I see that you're very empathetic, you're able to connect with your teammates. That's the positive side. The other side is, you have a problematic staff, and you need to address that, and you want to use the right emotive language, like, I understand, I seem to to my mind, it seems like you're doing this. Can you validate that? Would that be correct? And again, being able to use emotive language, once you're able to connect on the emotional level, it's easier to converse. Remember, we are emotional creatures. We have emotions. Just to be able to drive things using facts seems to be not enough to be able to connect with your staff. And I am a good um um I have a good testimony on that. Wait, let me just before I go to my testimony. When there's occurrence or violation, need to issue disciplinary action. That's true. And you need to calibrate this. Sometimes because of our limited vocabulary, we use abrasive words. Sure, you can be assertive, but there is a balance between assertiveness and being abrasive. When do you become abrasive? When you lack empathy, you can become abrasive, right? So we can assert, this person needs to know, needs to be given a feedback, and I'm not going to, play with words. I'm just gonna tell it straight. But how are you gonna tell that straight if you don't have, or if you lack the necessary emotive vocabulary? Very important. Good point. going back to my testimony, and I manage a lot of people, and they have their own issues, they have their own problems, and it's very important for me, rather than jumping directly to why I'm visiting, for example, why I'm visiting Bohol or Bacolod or whatever, and then oops, Coach Lito might have an issue with our performance. No, I jump in first on touching base with how are you doing, how are you feeling, how does it feel to be a leader, what are your common challenges as a leader, and how do you feel about it, and I'd like to encourage you that I've seen to be getting positive feedbacks about you, and hearing that is very encouraging to me, again using emotive language. However, then you can just use another form of emotive language to drive a point, but it is an emotive language, and being able to have a wide range of vocabulary. I also have being able to pull this emotive language on the spot can be very difficult. So I also prepare for my conversation. And Plutchik's framework is very helpful when I try to write down some of the languages I'd like to utilize every time I speak to them, or when I'm about to speak to them. So very important. It's really an exciting thing, and being able to use this emotive language very effectively. And I tell you, plus 10 points to your leadership style if you're able to use emotive language. And that's going to be something very, very interesting in the upcoming seminar. So we have a concept in EI called emotional contagion. I mentioned that to you. And that means it's like COVID, it's contagious. Emotions are also contagious. Not only do we influence with the words we use, like emotive vocabulary, but also with our nonverbals. In other words, we communicate and influence in verbal and nonverbal. You may not realize that, or you may know about it, but a whole lot of people, from what I understand, and this is from experience, that they would listen more to my nonverbal than to the things that I say. The things that I say just confirmatory to my behavior. You get what I mean? The priority in terms of receiving information is my nonverbal, followed by my verbal. So though we express ourselves in three ways: the visual, the verbal, and the vocal, you will find that and I would lump together both the visual and the vocal, because it's the visual means how you behave, how you conduct yourself, and then the vocal is your tone. You can say things in a very using safe words or neutral words, but your tone can be perceived as differently. Same thing with visual and verbal. I can be saying things like, hey, we're family here. You can always come to me as your boss. Don't treat me as like your boss or your immediate supervisor, but treat me like a friend, a family member, maybe a dad or a father or mother. And you can always come to me with your issues, and we'll try to help you out. And that's verbal. But in the visual, say for example, you've said that word, you're always saying those words, and people feel comfortable with you being a fatherly figure, a motherly figure in the way you lead. And then all of a sudden, your staff got sick. Your staff got sick. You didn't bother to call them. And then when they reported after 2 weeks, you berated them, you scolded them, like you didn't even bother to inform me, or hand over some of your pending work or things like that. And when you say that, and then at the same time you're saying that we're family, it just doesn't jive, right? It affects your authenticity. Anything that is not aligned with your visual, verbal, or vocal puts a question mark in your authenticity. And that's where we will also be covering that in the July 25 workshop. It's how we're communicating. But are you aware of how you're communicating? Are you aware of how you're affecting those people around you? You might be thinking, I'm okay, I seem to be communicating this, but they seem to be receiving it differently. And have you received feedback? Are you comfortable with receiving feedback so that you can adjust the way you communicate as a leader? And I tell you, 80% of the time, as leaders, that's our number one tool. The visual, the verbal, and the vocal as leaders. No? Okay, anyway, that's going to be a very critical thing that we'll be covering come July. Okay, I have only a few minutes, but let me just start with this one. Empathy. Empathy and emotional expression are connected in several ways. And you have empathy is the feeling that you understand another person's experience. But there's a but, and that is a very critical EI skills, no? That we will be covering in July. But let me just ask you this: is empathy similar to sympathy? Absolutely not. They're quite different. Empathy is really deep dive into the emotions. You're actually feeling and you understand that emotions. You're actually familiar with such an emotion. And that's a very good thing, having the empathy skills. Sympathy, I understand. I have an idea of how you feel, but I don't necessarily feel it. Doesn't mean that you're sad. I'm going to be sad, but I understand that emotion, sadness. That's sympathy. So we will be covering that. So and that is under expression, and it's really very important also to convey empathy. And then the emotive language that we were using is driven by empathy. Having empathy makes us familiar with all sorts of emotions, and having specific emotions, being able to identify them, makes our empathy much, much stronger. Okay. So I think that's going to be a very interesting aspect of our all those module 1 to 8. Empathy is kind of, I think, covered in 1 or 2 modules, and that's a very important factor in emotional intelligence. In fact, if you're gonna visit some of the frameworks, empathy is a standalone competency by itself, because it's really a very, very complex concept or composite, but nonetheless a very, very critical one. Do you have any questions so far? I think that's about it with my sharing. So on that note, Ali, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you again, Sir Lito, for that very wonderful webinar sneak peek of what's to come for our July program of the same title. Again, thank you everyone who joined us this afternoon. But before we let you go, please hold on for a while. Um, okay, so to let you guys know what you can expect during the program on July. So that's again July 25 to 26. It's a 2-day workshop. It's a 2-day training program, leading with emotional intelligence. Sir Lito was able to cover earlier the modules that we will be covering during the whole program, so you can have an idea already of what's to come. And we hope you are excited for that. Of course, you'll get a lot of benefits, especially you lead powerfully with presence and impact. You will gain valuable emotional insights and awareness to inspire and maintain productive relationships and apply collaborative, inclusive, and creative communication practices and more. So again, that's a 2-day workshop. It's a whole day, so it's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It will be done online, so it's through the Zoom platform again. So if you are interested, please do let us know. You can get in touch with us right here on our communication channels. So we have through email, that's solution@quintegral.com. You can also get in touch with us through our Facebook page, that's Quintegral Asia. And you can also connect with us through LinkedIn. We have 2 pages, that's for Quintegral Philippines and for Singapore. So again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Before we let you go, we have an evaluation form. Of course, we'd like to hear your feedback. What do you want to learn next on our Learning Forum series for the next month? What do you wish for us to improve on? What do you want to learn more about? You can tell us. That would be greatly appreciated. So thank you again, and we hope to see you on the next one and on July 25 and 26. Thank you. Thank you so much.